Life is difficult, more difficult, I think, for some people than it is for others. I read a story this week about a guy by the name of James Robinson. In 2014, he walked 21 miles and took 2 bus rides to get to work every day at a factory where he made $10.55 an hour. It seemed kind of crazy, and it's not like he liked it, but it was part of life. It's how he survived. A lot of times, unless somebody picked him up along the way, or depending on traffic of the day, he would get home and have to turn around and come back within 2 or 3 hours, if you can imagine that, and what that would be like, until a 19-year-old college student decided to do something about it. A friend of his told him this story. And he didn't have a lot of money, but he did have the ability to be able to set up a GoFundMe account on the internet. Some of you have no idea what that is. But it's an opportunity for people to be able to give online. And there were so many people that were touched by that particular story that in 2014, late 2014, he actually raised $350,000 to be able to give cars away to people who actually needed them. James Robinson was the first to pick up his amongst many who would receive a free car from the local Ford dealership. I don't know what kind of a gift that is. But February 2015, he picked up his Ford Taurus, and this is what he said. He said, "I chose the Ford Taurus because it's simple on the outside but strong on the inside, just like me." Think about this. One kid made his decision to try to change things, joined by people with the same heart, did something that none of them could do by themselves. 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verses 1 to 5 is kind of the heart of our message today. It says this: "Now, brothers and sisters, we want you to know the grace that God has given the Macedonian churches." Now, check out their story. In the midst of severe trial, not in access, not in the good times, but listen to what it says here. In the midst of severe trial, this is what defined them. Their overflowing joy and extreme poverty welled up in rich generosity. For I testify that they gave as much as they were able and even beyond their ability, entirely on their own. They urgently pleaded with us for the privilege, not the necessity, but the privilege of sharing in the service of the Lord's people. And here's the result of that situation. And they exceeded our expectations. They gave themselves first to the Lord and then to the will of God, also for us. Our topic for today, this morning, is quite simple. It's corporate generosity. And what I want to do is ask a very kind of simple question this morning, and that is this: what happens when God's people, generous people, get together? If you've been here over the last month, we have been kind of building a building. We've been talking about generosity. We've been talking about God's generosity. We've been talking about our call to generosity. And today I want to examine a slightly larger picture within this picture. I want to talk about a piece of who God created us to be. And this is what I want you to taste and see. We could be the generous church. This could and should be things that define us as a body of believers. It could and is and needs to be part of our DNA and part of our culture of our church. And so, for the next few moments, that's what I want to talk about. I want to talk about what it looks like for us to live generous lives together as we kind of finish this generosity series. And to get started, I want to define the generous church a little bit for a few moments this morning. Because I think sometimes when we talk about this, we're not really sure what I'm talking about. And so I want to define this for you this morning. And the generous church that I'm talking about this morning is made up of, first of all, soul-shifted individuals. And I know that maybe is foreign language to some of you this morning here, because if you haven't been with us over the last few weeks, then that may be a new kind of term for you. It's kind of like coming in on the end of a conversation. You always kind of wonder, what in the world was the rest of that conversation like, right? And in some ways, it's the same with this particular kind of wording in this phrasing. I'm not sure you can really understand and participate in what we're talking about this morning without understanding the heart that we talked about in weeks 1 and week 2. And I know that this morning that kind of maybe sounds a bit arrogant to you. I know that it kind of sounds maybe even strange. But over the last 3 weeks, what we have been doing is building on this generosity thing. If you look at week 1, excuse me. If you look at week 1, what we did was we built a foundation. We talked about, in fact, where this whole generosity thing comes from, where it should start. And that is the generosity of God shown to us, right? We talked about that and how much He deserves glory for everything that we see around us, that we have been given everything by Him. Week 2, we built on that foundation. We started talking about our response to this generosity. In fact, if you remember, we took it a step further and we talked about the fact that we are entrusted with everything that we have as stewards of what God has given to us. But that the truth is that we often live like consumers within our society, right? We take the master's wealth and we use it for our own purposes. And so that's why we talked about this idea that we need a soul shift from consumers to stewards, which is what we were created to be. And the truth is, that's huge. I mean, it's so huge, and it's such a strange way of thinking within our society that we literally had to spend all of last week talking about, okay, so how do we start this? How do we begin this process of trying to learn what it means to be a generous individual? And yet I would take you another step further beyond this today. Because I would say to you today that if you don't get this steward thing, if you don't understand that this generosity thing isn't just something that makes us feel good, but it's actually our calling. It's not just about making a name for yourself, but that you don't own anything. If you don't understand that you were given a great blessing and you were responsible for what you do with the blessings that you have in your life, then I got to just be honest with you this morning. You're missing a big piece of this puzzle. You see, the steward is a person who has a master. He has a reason and a calling to give. It's not random. It's not based on the fads of the day. A steward is somebody who's been entrusted with the wealth of heaven. Think about that for a moment. And that makes all the difference in the world. So friends, when I talk about the generous church today, this is not your pastor kind of talking to the leadership of this church and trying to push some kind of new agenda for a new budget for the coming year. It's not me trying to surprise my treasurer this morning that hey, there's going to be something that I'm going to press on him this morning. They need to hear this message too. But what I'm talking about this morning when I talk about the generous church is I'm talking about a bunch of people that the world thinks is crazy because they're not caught up in the whole ownership game. They're not caught up in the ownership game, the entitlement game, sorry. This is a group of stewards praising God for the things that they have been given, using it to honor Him with what they've been given. Why? Because this group just might not share anything else in common except for this. They are united with a heart to serve and to honor God with what they've been entrusted with. You see, a generous church is made up of soul-shifted individuals bent on being faithful with what they've been given. Which brings me to number 2. Number 2, the generous church that I'm talking about today is active. They're not only soul-shifted, but they're active. There's this really cool story in the Old Testament. Exodus chapter 16, actually. 17, maybe. 17, I think. And it's the story of a group by the name of the Israelites that are in the desert. And they just have gone through this crisis because they're in the middle of the desert and they don't have water. And they're angry at their leader because he led them there, and he's angry at them. In fact, he in the middle of this story looks up and says, God, what am I going to do with these people? Right? And you can understand that frustration in the background, and they're just at odds. They're on different sides of the situation, and it's just resolved when they're attacked by the Amalekites or something of the sort, these enemies. And so all of a sudden, in the middle of this, Moses, their leader, snaps into leadership mode. He sends out his best man to go and defend against these attacks. And he himself goes up on this hillside nearby, and he represents the Lord before them and holds up the staff of the Lord. And in the process of this, he realizes something strange is going on. Whenever he raises his hands, Israelite wins. But whenever he drops his hands, the enemy begins to move forward. And so, recognizing this, he gets two of his leaders that are with him to hold up one on each side, each hand, so that they never fall until the battle is won. And I tell you that story this morning, and I love that story, first of all, because moments before they were divided. Right? On different sides. But the moment that the attack happened, they were united as one. Joshua, Moses' right-hand man, filling his role as battle leader, and Moses doing his job as a leader, lifting them up before God, and his men supporting him on each side. And then on top of that, the Lord going with them. It's the reason why they won that day. But let me tell you the other reason why I tell you this example this morning, and go back to this conversation about generosity this morning. They won the day because each person fulfilled the task that was set before them. You see it. I want to make a kind of a weird statement this morning. It may even be a bit offensive to some of you here this morning, and yet this is truth that I'm laying out before you. You can be in the church, but not part of the generous church that I speak of today. Can I say that again so that it can kind of sink in with you a little bit this morning? You can be in the church, but not part of the generous church that I'm talking about today. You say, Pastor, what are you talking about? But you see, you can love the idea of people coming together and being generous together. You can talk about this idea of that we should go out and take what we have to honor the people around us. You can rub shoulders with these people in the church, but never get out of your chair. Why, you ask? Because you see, a generous church is a group of people who put the call that they have in their lives to be generous into action. They look for opportunities to serve and to give and to bless. You want to read a potent book in the Bible? Read the book of James. Chapter 2, verse 14 to 17 says this. It is the epitome of the example that we are talking about this morning. It says this. What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if somebody claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such faith save them? And then he gives an example. Catch this. Suppose a brother or sister is without clothes or daily food. If one of you says, go in peace, keep warm and be fed, but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? In the same way, faith by itself is not accompanied by action is not as good as faith with action? No, it actually says it is dead in this passage. You see, this is where the conversation gets a little bit uncomfortable in this whole thing. Because you see, it's possible to believe and not do anything about it, and therefore leave your faith useless. And I want you to catch this. It's the same way. You can like the idea of generosity, but do nothing about it. But, this is not the generous church that I'm talking about this morning. You see, a generous church is a bunch of people, and they have purpose, and they have calling to be generous, but at the very same time, they are actively living out their generosity. It's not just a great concept to them. Could I give you a really cool example of this? I am so proud to be part of a church that is generously investing into missions work on a regular basis. In fact, I'm not sure if everybody knows this within the church. You may or may not know this. But one of the things that the board decided long before I ever came, and I was just so pleased to be part of this when I came, is that they decided that 10% of our annual budget is going to be specifically and intentionally put into missions work. It goes into our Cuba trip, for example, that we've been doing each year. It's going into local missions, a small portion of it. A large portion of it goes to missionaries that are literally all over around the world, representing us in different nations. On top of this, again, I'm not sure if all you knew this or not, but if you specifically and intentionally give to missions in our church, that money goes above and beyond the 10% that we give on a regular basis. We get a report each year from Wesleyan World Missions. You may not know this, We are in the top 5 per capita in giving to Wesleyan World Missions. Did you know that? I mean, I'm proud of my church. I'm proud that we together can do this. But don't get mad at me and what I'm about to say. Okay? Don't get mad at me. I'm trying to illustrate this and make this real for you, and you need to understand this. You can be totally behind this, but if you're not giving to this church, that doesn't belong to you. You see it. Why? Because you see, the generous church that I'm talking about today is a group of soul-shifted individuals who are doing their part, actively engaging in generosity. Not that generosity is just about money. We talked about that last week, right? But there's an example for you. Are you following me? Are you tasting this? Are you catching the vision that I'm talking about? Which brings me to number 3. And I got to tell you that number 3 is totally humbling. It's in some ways it is difficult to put into words to describe the power of what I'm talking about. But you see, the generous church that I'm talking about this morning is not only a group of soul-shifted individuals who are acting out their generosity, but it's also a powerful entity within our world. Many of you participated in this past week's activities for Generosity Week. One of the things that we did was adopt a family for Christmas. Some of you actually went out and bought toys for that and brought them in. Some of you gave us money to go out and buy those toys for the family that we adopted this Christmas. And so Monday morning, what we did was we went out and we went shopping. We got all the stuff that was on their list, and we went over to Salvation Army and we dropped those off. And while I was there, I want to show you this morning the power of the generous church in motion. And so if you'll kind of play that video in the background, I know it's going to be difficult to watch it and pay attention to me at the same time. But they allowed me to take a short video of this. Did you know that this year they are sponsoring 171 families? And I'm not just talking about, $25 per family. We're talking about they're taking their wish list and they're doing their best to fill everything on their wish list to give these families an incredibly generous, overwhelming, luscious Christmas. 171 families that were screened that need the help to survive this particular Christmas. Now, stop and consider this with me for just a few moments. How in the world do you go about giving Christmas to 171 families? Well, let me tell you the answer to that. You know where that begins? It begins right here with me. And I'm not talking about me in general. It begins with me deciding, what can I give? What can I give? Now, the truth is, I have no hope of filling that need by myself. But listen to me, together. Together, you can play that once more just because I want to point out a couple things in the video, but play that again. But I guess it's still playing. Together, we sponsored one family together. Do you see that? Now hear me for a second. Some other churches also did the same thing. Now we have 2 families that we've sponsored together. An individual has enough money maybe in the midst of that to be able to do one on their own. Now we have 3 families. Do you see how this is beginning to compile? And that's not the end. Did you see that room, not that room full of boxes, but did you see that room along the way in the back that was just, I shadowed it for just a second, it was just full of just boxes? That was somebody who went out and they knew that the Salvation Army does this each year, and they found out that they could bid on this pallet load full of toys that are brand new toys. And so they bid on it, and then they gave it to the Salvation Army. It's a whole room full of just toys. It's going to turn the corner here in a second and show you a great big huge room full of toys. Do you know what that is? That's individuals who said, I don't have a church that I could give to. I don't have enough money to be able to do this myself, but I can give you some money, or I can give you some toys. But before Christmas is over, all of those will be gone. That's kind of how it works. There are businesses who have jumped on board. There are individuals who have raised funds. Together as a community, we have raised enough funds and brought enough stuff in for 171 families to know the generosity of church. That's cool. That is the power of a generous church in motion. You know, I mentioned the very first week that we are just one of 6 churches. Just one of 6 churches that are doing this generosity series this year. That all the Wesleyan churches up and down the Southwest Shore are doing this together. We also gave the same challenge to every single church. Every single church was to go out into their community and figure out a way to be generous amongst their churches. Did you know that some of them took up offerings over the past month? Some of them did meals like we did. Some of them volunteered for some things within their community. Did you know that the kettle at Walmart was completely manned? In fact, AJ called up the Salvation Army and said, we're just going to totally take care of all the hours at Walmart for you this year to do the kettle. Did you know that Port Maitland wrapped more than 130 presents for the school? Just went in and said, we'll be your present wrappers this year for the kids. Did you know that Woods Harbor raised more than $6,600 to give to their community? And I just need to tell you, I got the emails last night. We were all putting this together, compiling it, and trying to figure out, a list of all the things that we've done together as 6 churches. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. But I want you to catch this, because those of you who are involved in this week, this belongs to you. Okay? You need to understand this. Together as the 6 churches, we gave just shy of $60,000 to the South Shore and more than 1,300 volunteer hours. We ought to praise God for that. Listen to me. Look what God gave us the privilege of doing. I got to tell you something in the background. This has nothing to do with the message. But man, it was fun. Those of you who were involved in this, you know what I'm talking about. It was so much fun. Man, when we took in these treats to the teachers each day, every day their excitement built. In fact, there was on Thursday, I caught one of the teachers. They finally got rid of their students, and they were running to the break room to get the pizza. That's how excited. I mean, one teacher, he said, listen, he said, my total Christmas diet is gone out the window. It was the coolest thing. Did you know, I can't tell you how much fun it was to interact with and to laugh with and to serve 45 firemen and their families. Some of them I had never met in my life. And have a chance to tell them, hey, there's no agenda to this. We're not trying to get you to come to our church or anything else. We just want you to know that you're appreciated. It was kind of interesting as I was talking to the chief. He told me that he was working on another fire station in the area, and they have a dinner each year, this time of year, for appreciation, but they have to put it on themselves. Isn't that interesting? He said, I can't tell you how much we appreciate you doing this for us. You know, it was so much fun to go in and pick out toys for a kid that I will never meet. Dear friends, that is the generous church that I'm talking about today. A group of individuals who have been soul shifted and are actively living out a life of generosity, watching God use their efforts to do powerful things that we could never do on our own. You know, I have something for you to chew on as we kind of finish up. This is an article in Relevant Magazine. You can do what you want with the statistics in it, but I found it incredibly interesting, and I wanted to share some of this with you. Somebody went through and they crunched the numbers of a generous church. And what they looked at was they looked at all Christians everywhere and the average of what Christians give in their tithing. Christians give about 2.5% on average of their income. Don't know if you knew that or not. It's kind of just an interesting thing. Side note to that, during the Great Depression, the number was actually 3.5% of their income. How interesting. Now, this morning, I know that some of you are thinking to yourself, well, the pastor's trying to get me to give more, or he's trying to make me feel guilty. That's not the case. In fact, you're dead wrong. The reason why I share this with you this morning is because what comes next. I want you to catch the vision of this. They also went on beyond this to say, okay, what if we raised that number to 10%? What would it look like? We're not talking 100% here today. We're talking about if all Christians gave 10% of their income, what would it look like? And this is the results that he came up with. 25 billion could relieve global hunger, starvation, and deaths from preventable diseases in 5 years. We could own that. 12 billion could eliminate illiteracy in 5 years. That could be ours. 15 billion could solve the world's water and sanitation issues, specifically in places where the world has 1 billion people that live on less than $1. That would be no more. 1 billion could fully fund all overseas missions work. And catch this, there would still be 100 to 110 billion left over for our regular expenses. Challenging, isn't it? You see, that is something that is overwhelming for any one of us. All but under the feet of God. Totally possible if God's people would step up to the challenge of being the generous church. Because that's who he created us to be. It's what he entrusted us with. You know, this past Tuesday, school was canceled. And so I dragged Elijah with me into the community kitchen. It's a ministry in town where we give out meals to people in the community. And being totally honest with you, he was a bit reluctant to go with me. I mean, it's a day off from school. You can do any number of things on a day off from school, right? But he came with me, and he donned an apron. And there was one point where I watched him serve 4 bowls of soup to 4 old ladies that came in and sat down, which is scary on more than one. I call my son Tipsy for a reason. But man, I was proud of him. Man, I was proud of him. And I need to say this to you. Do you know where the generous church begins? It begins when someone says, I don't care about what anybody else is doing. I can't control anybody else around me and what they do with their time or their money. But I can do something. But I can do something. How about you today? Are you there? Because man, I want you to understand, does God ever have some great things ahead of us if we trust him with this stuff? But you know where it begins? It begins right here with me, what I do with what I've been given. See, I can't speak for any of you this morning. But as for me and my house, I want to be part of this generous church. Don't you?